morning. Welcome to the Morning Momentum this beautiful Tuesday. My name is Alfonsoh. This is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. Of course, we are waking to a beautiful Tuesday. Since yesterday, we had a tree planting day and much was achieved, despite a few sentiments here and there. But let's take a look at the top stories making the headlines on the papers this morning. We start with the Standard newspaper. Intrigues behind 17 billion mystery petrol deepen. Now, who owns what? Kenya Ports Authority has said the oil cargo belongs to Aramco and not Njeri, who is still missing. KPA claims it had no dealings with Njeri's company. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 9. On page 2, Magoha's 250 million shillings in life, but 150 million shillings in death. Now, widow of the late minister has told the court her husband was worth 100 million shillings less than he had declared in parliament during his vetting. And more of that story is beefed up for you on page 2. Officials push for mobile labs to ease junior secondary school congestion. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 12. On the tree planting day, the story is beefed up for you on page 4, 6, 8, and page 21. Also inside is the Financial Standard, and this morning it's all about Ruto's plan to avoid economic catastrophe. We'll take a look at that story inside the Standard as well. Now, let's take a look at page 2. Magoha wealth comes to light as a widow gets nod to oversee estate. In March 2019, when the Committee of Appointments presented the vetting report on Professor Magoha to the August House, it was revealed that he had a net worth of 250 million shillings. On his death, he was reported to be worth 150 million shillings, a notable variance of 100 million shillings when comparing his wealth declaration and succession documents. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 3, judge rejects maintenance plea from woman in divorce case. The couple married on August 9, 1975 under the African Marriage and Divorce Act. The woman claimed that her ex-husband, a former police officer, introduced other women into their marriage in 2009 and 2012. And more of that story is beefed up for you on page 3. Let's take a look at page 4. Cabinet travel hurts Kenya's struggling economy. Now, CSS were dispatched to different counties to participate in tree planting initiative, raising concerns about the efficient use of public resources. Wanga expressed concern about the escalating waste of resources during high-profile trips. And you want to catch up with more of that story on page 4. Of course, this is a story that has raised eyebrows and people are raising concerns. And if you want to get more insights on that story, you can catch up with it on page 4 of the Standard this morning. On page 6 and 7, you have the pictorial gallery of the tree planting day. And now let's take a look at page 8, government to gazette water catchment areas. Ruto says 10,000 wetlands to be protected from human activities such as settlement. President promises to have key catchment fenced and all the 83 squatters compensated and moved to other areas. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 8. Also in Garissa County, climate change threat to national security. Interior Cabinet Secretary Kithure Kindiki yesterday declared climate change a threat to national security due to the challenges brought by changing weather patterns. You can catch up with more of that on page 8. On page 9, intrigues. KPA disowns oil importers' papers. KPA has disowned businesswoman's documents. It says oil belongs to a different company. Now, the intrigue surrounding the importation of 17 billion oil diesel deepened yesterday after the Kenya Ports Authority management disowned missing businesswoman's importation documents for the cargo. And more of that story is on page 9. Let's take a look at page 10. Court allows House to grill cabinet secretaries. Ruling settles a dispute between Azimio and Kenya Kwanza senators. Judge says Azimio's interpretation of the Supreme Law was narrow and did not reflect Parliament's roles. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 10. Still on page 10, UDA hopefuls hit 500,000 shillings legal fees. Now, two petitioners who contested and lost the United Democratic Alliance nominations in the Trans Nzoia County have been slapped with a legal bill of more than 500,000 shillings after they lost a petition at the Kitale Law Courts. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. On page 11, Raila moves to stop Ruto's march in ODM Nyanza backyard. Orange Party starts carrying out membership registration and grassroots elections for party officials. Let's strengthen ODM to bring better leadership to this country, says opposition leader. That story is on page 11. Let's take a look at page 12. Use mobile labs for junior secondary schools in remote areas, key state agency advises. Innovation has a chemical gas cylinder sink with taps, connected pipes, and other required kits. SEPU offers to convert some existing classrooms into laboratories following the new setup. You can catch up with more of that story on page 12. 220,000 is the cost of mobile laboratory, and it is suitable for schools which have no electricity as well. You want to catch up with more insights on that initiative? It's beefed up for you on page 12 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 14. Global Fund gets new mosquito net supplier after KEMSA row. 15.3 million treated nets will be disbursed in 22 high malaria burden counties. Official launch of distribution will be in Homa Bay County tomorrow. Let's take a look at another top story here. CS distributes 2,400 phones to health promoters. Now, the Health Cabinet Secretary Susan Nahumicha has distributed 2,400 smartphones to community health promoters in West Pokot. On page 15, cleric in push for safe abortion in hope to end premature deaths. He believes saving lives is more important than adhering strictly to religious norms. The cleric chose to utilize the pulpit to educate women and girls about reproductive health. And more of that story is beefed up for you on page 15. Let's now shift gears and take a look at expert opinion inside the Standard this morning. Mambo matatu that Ruto must pursue with ruthless precision. Each passing day, President William Ruto continues to record a shape his legacy with defining actions and pronouncements that inform policy shift. In his case to change the country for the better, Dr. Ruto should not relent on the fervent commitment he made to the people during and after the campaign trail that include economic recovery from the base up, draining the swamp of vicious cartels and making institutions work. More of those expert opinions on page 16 and page 17. Let's now take a look at page 18. Palestinians have a right to resist occupation by all means. Does Israel have the right to self-defense in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict asserted by the U.S. and its Western alliance? You can catch up with more of that story on page 18. Now, let's shift gears to the Financial Standard. How taxes sustain high pump prices. Kenyans are paying more for oil compared to their counterparts in East African countries, owing to various levies passed by MPs. And that story is on page 6 and page 7 of the Financial Standard. The think tank seeks ban on export of raw materials to boost earnings. Now, Kipra says value addition will maximize the potential of agricultural sector and transform the economy. Now, that story is beefed up for you on page 2 of the Financial Standard article. Kenya's case to host Africa's payment system takes longer. The anti-dollar head office allows firms in Africa to pay for intra-African trade transaction in their local currency. That story is also beefed up for you on page 3 of the Financial Standard article. Now, let's take a look at this story on how taxes On petroleum, sustain high pump prices. Consumers in Uganda are paying lower prices despite the longer distance from port compared to Kenyans. Now, last week, a section of MPs allied to the Kenya Kwanza coalition are reported to have pleaded with President William Ruto to allow the reduction of petroleum taxes so as to bring down the cost of fuel. Now, in numbers, 207.55 shillings is the price of diesel in Dodoma, Tanzania, while petrol goes for 210 shillings, 0.52 cents. Now, 80.37 shillings is the total taxes and levies on a liter of petrol in Kenya. You want to catch up with more of those insights on page 6 and page 7 of the Financial Standard article. Let's now shift gears to county news. Leaders brave heavy rains to plant trees in central region. Chelugui urged the county government and the Kenya Forest Service to support the initiative. Tree planting also took place at the Nyewasco Kiganjo water treatment plant. Now, this is all about the tree planting day. You can catch up with that story on page 21. In Kisumu County, Nyanza leaders, state officials lead residents to plant indigenous trees. Nyanza leaders across the political divide and the government officials joined hands in the National Tree Planting Day, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 21. Let's take a look at page 22. Now, Northern Region, 3 die in flare-up over recovery of stolen livestock in Turkana. At least 3 people died and 6 others were wounded in an inter-clan conflict over recovery of stolen livestock in Turkana South Sub-County. More of that story is on page 22. Also, Pioneer Mvita MP passes on after a long illness. Former MP was influential during former Presidents Kenyatta, Moi and Kibaki's administrations. He started his political career as KANU youth winger, and more of that story is on page 22. May his soul rest in peace. Let's take a look at page 24. Health volunteers at the frontline in patient care. The impact of investment in community health services and CHPs is evident. Regular household registration and visitation have improved with a reduction in malaria burden. More of that story on page 24. In Nandi County, county hives off part of Kapsabet showground to set up sports facility. The Nandi County administration has allocated a portion of the Kapsabet agricultural showground land for the construction of a sports facility. Now, with that story, we shift gears now to the business news. Now, Kenya's captains of industry-led tree-growing initiatives exercise coincides with companies' sustainability blueprints. These have seen farms play their role against climate change, and more of that story is on page 25. Now, on page 26, climate financing. Poor nations to face funding disappointment in Dubai. Developing countries have been skeptical of the World Bank as a potential host of the fund for several reasons. Delegates worry about the bank's reputation, including the dominance of developed country donors and lack of climate savviness in its operations. In numbers, huge 225 billion shillings is the amount that the World Bank will keep for every $100 billion offered to the countries and communities reeling from disaster. Let's shift gears to international news. Now, British Premier picks Cameroon as Foreign Secretary, sacks Suella. Rishi Sunak is reshaping his top team ahead of next week's autumn statement. James Cleverly has been announced as a Home Secretary. More of that story on page 27. In Australia, state probes 16 over illegal debt recovery. 16 Australian public servants are under investigation for their role in an illegal debt recovery for their role in an the federal government has confirmed, and more of that is also on page 27. On page 28, Gaza hospitals caught on front line of Israel war. Some 36 health facilities, including 22 hospitals, have been damaged since the war began. The World Health Organization says Al-Shifa in Gaza City, the territory's largest with 700 beds, has ceased to function. And more of that story is beefed up for you on page 28. On page 29, in the U.S., GOP senator pulls out of presidential campaign. U.S. Republican Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina has dropped out of the 2024 presidential race. He had hoped to become the first African American to secure the Republican nomination. That story is beefed up for you on page 29. Now, let's move on to sports news inside the Standard this morning. And we start with no LeBron, no problem. Without LeBron James, LA Lakers put away Blazers. Now, Davis scored 30 points with 13 rebounds in 116-110 win. Also, tennis, Djokovic ends year as world number 1. Novak Djokovic will end the year as world number 1 for a record 8th time after he beat Holger Rune at the ATP Finals in Turin, Italy. And more of that story on page 36. On page 37, golfing. Karanga rules Kiambu course. Karanga shatters 10-year record to win Kiambu Captain Prize. Golfer breaks course record set by his grandfather in 2013. And more of that story is on page 37. Let's now shift gears to football. It's Guardiola versus Klopp once again. Manchester City and Liverpool, after reading high top the Premier League. Just 1 point separates the two teams at the top of the standings, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 39. Let's take a look at the cover page. Masood, it's time for Kenyans to believe in us. Kenya will face Gabon and Seychelles in World Cup qualifiers this week. Masood ready to put team first ahead of World Cup qualifiers, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 40. Now, how Kiprop quenched 42-kilometer E10 title thirst. Luke Kiprop, winner of the second edition of E10 International Marathon on Sunday, was a herder who topped the race on borrowed shoes. A media-shy Kiprop has been under the guidance of coach Eric Kogo and has been training alongside world 10,000-meter silver medalist Daniel Simiyu in E10. Now, with that story of Kiprop, we take a quick break and then we come back with the top stories making the headlines on the Daily Nation this morning. Don't go away. The best is yet to come. See you on the other side of this broadcast. Welcome back to the Morning Momentum. If you're just joining the conversation, my name is Alfonsoh. Remember to follow us across all our socials at Younib_TV on Instagram and Younib Media TV on Facebook and YouTube. Let's take a look at the top stories making the headlines on the Daily Nation this morning. The elephant in the room. Forgery claim in 17 billion shillings fuel saga. Now, Ports chiefs disown documents presented by businesswoman Anne Njoroge as fake and intended to steal a consignment of diesel whose ownership has been in dispute. The cargo was offloaded in contravention of a court order even as the trader's whereabouts remain unknown, and her lawyers sue police bosses over arrest. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. Controversy. Galana Energies Limited says consignment was to meet country's requirements. Now, also top lawyers jostle for upcoming Judicial Service Commission vacancy. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. On page 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, Green Future. Ruto sets Kenya on path to 15 billion trees target by 2030. Also on page 3, Heroic. Woman swims across flooded Tana River to deliver son in hospital. Let's take a look at page 2. Exams Council issues alert of fake KCSE test papers being sold online. PS Kipsang assures that the examination process has been running seamlessly. NEC chief cautions candidates' parents not to fall prey to conmen circulating papers on social media platforms. And that story on page 2. On page 3, pregnant woman swims across flooded river to deliver her son. More than 20,000 people have been affected by the floods in Tana River County. Saida is one of the few lucky ones. Many more people are facing hard times after their villages were cut off by floods. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 3. Let's take a look at page 4. Senior state officials, governors lead tree planting across country. Government officials tout the benefits of trees, including economic empowerment of communities and medicinal value. Kenyans joined cabinet secretaries and other county and national government leaders in observing the National Tree Planting Day. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 4. On page 5, trees to help cut living cost. Now, President William Ruto has linked the accelerated tree growing drive to his bid to reduce the cost of living by addressing the cost of food. That story is beefed up for you on page 5. Let's take a look at page 6. Raila heeds Ruto trees call. Opposition leader also used the event to launch ODM registration drive. While the ODM boss planted a tree, he gave the official event a wide berth. That story is beefed up for you on page 6. On page 7, first steps towards 15 billion trees target. Initiative is one of the key pillars of President William Ruto's plan to combat climate by planting 15 billion trees by the end of 2030. Now, you have more insights of that story in pictorial form on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 8, Nation Family Bank join hands to plant 2,000 trees. Mr. Gitagama says NMG is committed to creating awareness on climate change. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Let's take a look at page 10. KPA now disputes papers in 17 billion oil import saga. Galana Energies Limited says consignment is part of supplies meant to meet the country's fuel requirements. We have genuine documents and those being circulated are fake and are being investigated by government agencies, says Kenya Ports Authority, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 10. Let's take a look at page 12. Inside bruising contest in Law Society of Kenya to pick next Judicial Service Commission representative. Regional interests at play as term of current male representative comes to an end. You can catch up with that story on page 12 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 14. Blow to workers in James Finlay suit. The workers want to be compensated for injuries they suffered while working at farms, plantations. More of that story is also beefed up for you on page 14. Let's take a look at the expert opinion. Why Pioneer CBC students face an uncertain future. These are sentiments by Benjamin Sogomo, and I quote, "Is there any understanding between the Ministries of Education and Planning and MPs along these lines?" You want to catch up with more of that on page 16 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's shift gears to county news. Now, in Kiambu County, Wamatangi fights off MP's accusations on EPZ project. Lawmakers had accused governor of failing to act swiftly on the project. Authority confirms that the county has requested gazettement of economic zone, and more of that story is beefed up for you on page 19. In Nyamira County, residents call for action on spiraling crime. Residents of Kisii and Nyamira counties have appealed to the government to tighten security in the region following incidences of murder, rape, and robberies. That story is beefed up for you on page 19. Briefly, in West Pokot, elders open new front in FGM war. In Western, farmers embrace commercial forestry. And in Nairobi County, 2,000 trees planted at Railways College. In Kilifi County, invest in coast cash crops, state urged. Now, also on page 20, the top story is specialized KDF unit set for return to banditry hotspots. County wants fortified security camps established in the regions. Operations of the crack military unit had managed to tame violence in the region. Now let's take a look at the international news on page 21 of the Daily Nation this morning. North Gaza hospitals out of service as fighting rages. Israel says 44 of its troops have been killed in the Gaza offensive. Death toll in Al-Shifa rises to 27. ICU patients and 7 babies, according to Hamas. That story is beefed up for you on page 21. Let's take a look at business news. Cash sent to counties falls 6 billion shillings despite Ruto pledge. Delayed release of cash has been a major headache for counties. This is the lowest disbursement to devolved units since the COVID period. And now let's take a look at the numbers. 78.5 billion Kenya shillings is the amount released to counties in the July-October period. 85.3 billion shillings is the amount in Kenya shillings that counties received in the July-October 2022 period. 20.3% share of the total financial year allocation that counties have received. Now, briefly, tax 5 firms to provide eTeams software. Kenya Revenue Authority has approved 5 companies to offer software links to its electronic tax invoice management system. Now, also investment, Afrexim Bank in KEPSA, KAM deal. In matters technology, Air Confirm eyes data center deals, and you want to catch up with more of those stories on page 22. Also, the DN2 article, Powering SMEs, Malaika startup makes pregnancy journey safe for mother and child. More of those insights are beefed up for you inside the DN2 article of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 23. Hotel management deals surge in Kenya on tourism recovery. Besides hotel operator deals, acquisitions have also surged as investors seek to capitalize on rebounded room sales, and that story is beefed up for you on page 23. Let's take a look at page 24. Ruto's plan to attract American tech giants looking to relocate from China. Kenya confident of reaping from the relentless trade tension between Washington and Beijing by hosting technology majors in Naivasha on stable energy supply, and that story is beefed up for you on page 24. Let's take a look at page 25. Who are this year's winners? Top 40 under 40 men. You can catch up with that story on page 25. Let's now move on to some other news, and that is now the sports news inside the Daily Nation this morning. Now, we start with athletics. Chepsaita ex-country added to AK calendar. AK Director Korir urges runners to start early preparations. Location, good test for athletes as it stands at high altitude of 2,100 meters. Also, 18 teams eye final slots in Talanta Hela football tournament. Now, the second round of Talanta Hela football tournament that kicks off in Nyeri this week will determine which 8 additional teams, 4 boys and 4 girls, will join the Elite 12 to make the final 16 teams in both categories for the Jamhuri Cup. Also, on page 41, National Tree Planting Day, while WRC Safari Rally up to speed. WRC Safari Rally Kenya staff celebrated the National Tree Planting exercise at the windswept Kasarani Super Special Stage, dominated by a mass of barren land bordering Santon, Kasarani and Mwiki concrete jungle estates in the outskirts of Nairobi. Also, Karan, now part of the Big Boys Club in Africa. Karan Patel and Khan have finally joined the elite group of Kenyan drivers who have won the African Rally Championship crown. More of that story on page 41. Let's take a look at page 42. Odhiambo exit marks end of Kenya Sevens historic golden generation. Several players have moved into sports management, giving back to the sport that made them. Billy the Kid was part of that wonderful group of exciting players that dazzled world of sevens, rugby and ruffled the establishment order over the past 2 decades. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 42. On page 43, Firat grapples with 4 injuries as Gabon looms. Harambee Stars opened their 2026 World Cup campaign on Thursday in Franceville. Now, 3-0 Paris Saint-Germain's win over defender Joseph Okumu's reigns in the French League 1 fixture on Saturday. That story is beefed up for you on page 43. Let's take a look at the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning. Kenya set on stamping out plastic pollution, says Ruto. 400 million tons of plastic waste are produced globally every year. President says Kenya has lived by example by enacting a number of legislations and directives. More of that story on the cover page. Also, HIV response spending to double in 3 years. Diseases Agency reveals Kenya's spending on HIV response could double to 36 billion shillings in 3 years. The National Syndemic Disease Control Council has said the intention is to shift from a dependency on external sources to a more sustainable model where a majority of the HIV expenditure is covered by funds generated within the country. More of that story on the cover page. In numbers, 36 billion shillings is the amount of money that the national government is planning to allocate to HIV response in the country over the next 3 years. Now, with that story of HIV, we come to the end of today's session of the Morning Momentum. Many thanks for choosing to stay with the Younib TV and, in a special way, the Morning Momentum. By extension, also, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all those who made this broadcast a success. The Chief Controller, Anifa, Kavira, and Penina Washera. I have been your host, Alfonsoh. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful Tuesday.